Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. From Eden to eternity, the Bible tells one big story of redemption. My name is Tiffany, and I want to spend a few minutes with you every day walking through the Bible chronologically. Together, we will explore God's sovereign plan as the events of Scripture unfold and point to Jesus. Hey friends, Tiffany here. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we walk through Ezekiel chapters 24 through 27. Our overarching takeaway isn't new. We will be reminded of God's sovereignty over all nations and how everything he does is for his purpose and his plan of redemption. Even now, thousands of years after Ezekiel lived, we still need to be reminded that God sees all and knows all. This is a truth we don't need to fear, but can take great rest in. As we arrive at Ezekiel chapter 24, we read Ezekiel's final parable. He may have simply shared the words of this parable, or he could have acted it out as he shared it as well. Either way, it was an important day when the Lord told him to mark down the day. This was the day Babylon began its third siege of Jerusalem in 587 BC. This same date is recorded in 2 Kings 25:1 and Jeremiah 39:1 and 52:4. It was important because all of the Lord's prophecies spoken through his obedient prophets now began. The prophecies that Judah and even those already in exile didn't want to believe were now coming true as Babylon began its final siege. In this last parable, Ezekiel uses the example of a pot being placed over a fire and boiling everything within it. This pot represents Jerusalem and all of her inhabitants. Ezekiel describes this pot that is filled with corrosion. Like this rusty pot, Jerusalem is covered in iniquity and sin. The hearts of the people are corroded because of the bloodshed they've committed through child sacrifice, murder, and idolatry. God had given the people many chances to cleanse themselves and seek obedience. We saw this during the reigns of various kings like Hezekiah and Josiah. But the people always turned back to their sinful ways. God's judgment has now come as he lays the logs and lit the spark. Babylon will consume Jerusalem, and God will not relent. In the second half of chapter 24, God sends a sign to the exiles concerning Jerusalem's demise, and this time it affects Ezekiel personally. The Lord told Ezekiel that his wife, the delight of his eyes, would die. And after she dies, he is not to mourn her publicly. He can only groan quietly. Ezekiel got up and shared this message with the people in the morning, and that night his wife died. We don't know why the Lord took Ezekiel's wife from him, but we are told what the sign means. The temple in Jerusalem had long been the people's pride and joy. It was the delight of their eyes. Even though they rebelled against the Lord continually, they believed his favor rested on them because of his presence in the temple. But as we studied in Ezekiel 9 through 11, God's presence would leave the temple and Jerusalem, and they now face judgment. These exiles would even lose the pride and joy of their sons and daughters who remained in Jerusalem. This was a solemn day, filled with grief even for Ezekiel. But God promises Ezekiel that one day his message will be one of hope. Chapter 25 begins a section that spans from chapters 25 through 32 concerning prophecies against the nations. Chapter 25 in particular details the judgments against the Ammonites, Moabites, Edomites, and Philistines. We have covered the demise of these nations in various other places in our journey. So to summarize, these nations will fall because of their mockery and laughter over Jerusalem's demise at the hand of the Babylonians. God will judge them as well, and they will all know He is the Lord. This brings us to the other 6 chapters, which talk about the fall of Tyre and Egypt. And we might wonder why so much ink and attention is given to the end of these 2 nations. It is likely because these 2 were the only ones that could possibly fend off an attack from Babylon. Tyre was an economic stronghold, and Egypt was a military powerhouse. But as we will see while we study, neither was a match for God's sovereign hand. We'll end our time today with 2 of these 3 chapters that discuss the fall of Tyre in Ezekiel 26 and 27. Remember, Tyre was a port city and commercial trade center located on the Mediterranean Sea. It's often linked with the city of Sidon and was home to the Phoenician people. Ezekiel's message against Tyre spoke of God's judgment on this city because they too would laugh and mock Jerusalem when she fell. They also rejoiced because a trade route competitor was now gone. But this nation would not remain an economic superpower. Despite the strongholds of her city and the ability to flee invaders by sea, this nation would be conquered many times. The conquering nations would come in waves. King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians would be first, and over time, the Persians, Greeks, and Romans would conquer Tyre as well. They would experience plunder, death, destruction, and weeping, like waves crashing on the shore. In chapter 27, Ezekiel describes Tyre as a merchant ship, which is appropriate considering their livelihood as seafaring people. Tyre was beautiful, strong, and ran perfectly, just like the ships coming and going from their port. Ezekiel even mentions an exhaustive and impressive list of Tyre's dealings with other nations. But then he describes how the great ship of Tyre will face shipwreck when the eastern wind sinks them. That eastern wind was Babylon. These nations they did business with would lament the fall of Tyre and its loss of wealth and power, and they would be shocked by God's judgment and His ability to do the same to them. Tomorrow, we will complete Ezekiel's prophecy against Tyre. But as we close today, it's important for us to remember that we are prone to the same sins. We often place our trust in money, power, and the economy. But the only one we place our trust in is Jesus Christ. He alone satisfies and enables us to walk in obedience until we see His face. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, friends.